Hello guys and welcome to another commentary video for my Restoration Druid. This time this is going to be 19 Halls of Atonement that I did a couple of days ago during this really nice affix. And again, I've done videos like this with Resto Shaman, and today we're going to be talking about Resto Druid, and we're doing with a big pull here right away. It's kind of a lot of things to talk about straight away, because you can see here this is a big pull, everyone's using heroism. I want to talk about some of the talents. Again, my talents on the right hand side, I'm using Flourish, I'm using Spring Blossoms, Soul of the Forest, very popular, Heart of the Wild, Balance Druid or Balance Affinity with Wild Charge and Scenario Word. So this is a big pull from the very get-go. A lot of people are using heroism. In here you can see I'm just trying to maintain Sunfires. There is a lot of members here, and I'm basically going into Eclipse. This time I'm using Rats to go into Lunar Eclipse, and once I go into Lunar Eclipse, I'm gonna go using my Convoke. And this is pretty much what a lot of the complexity comes down to in terms of Resto Druid DPS. Resto Druid DPS is all about that balance affinity, it's all about that Heart of the Wild. You can see my Heart of the Wild still has like 40 seconds or 30 seconds left on it. Going into Convokes, using Convoke from Night Fae as a main source of DPS. This is why a lot of Resto Druids at this given point are picking things like Flourish. Flourish has become the go-to for a lot of the high keys, and it's because mainly, if you're running Convoke, which you probably are, Night Fae is the way to go for a lot of Resto Druids. For Druids in general, Night Fae, for actually most of the good range DPS classes, Night Fae is the way to go. So, if you're running Convoke and you're using Convoke for DPS, which a lot of times you should, again, it depends if it's an organized group. If it's not, we're doing a 19. This is semi-organized group. If it wasn't an organized group, a lot of the times I might be using Convoke the Spirits to heal. And I actually do end up using Convoke the Spirits to heal throughout this dungeon, even though I've set out to use Convoke for DPS. So it's not always going to go according to plan. And probably the biggest downfall of my run, because this is not a perfect run, I'm not playing this in the best way. This is my alt. My alt is around 216 item level, 215 item level, something along those lines. There's a lot of better ways that I could have optimized this. So I just want to talk about the Prideful here, because Prideful is kind of important. I actually think I have a better time easier time handling Prideful on my Druid than my Shaman. It's really weird, but either way, I am running Circle of Life with that Legendary, which means that my HOTS deal there or heal in shorter time in the same way that my bleeds and damaging abilities. So generally speaking, there's more impact, or you get more impact sooner. So you can see here, just making sure I huddle people. A lot of the times during Prideful, I try to do a combo where, again, this might not be visible here, but let's say for example I have rejuvenations on everyone here, and I try to use regrowth on a person, because you have to remember, if you Swiftman the person, Swiftman is going to remove a HOT, and there's a priority system on which HOT is going to be removed. A lot of the times, if I'm gonna have rejuvenation and regrowth HOT, Swiftman is gonna remove the regrowth HOT. So a lot of the times I try to put rejuve on everybody, heal people with regrowth, and then use my Swiftman into wild growth and into flourish. So this is something that I use for prideful healing a lot of times, because I don't really want to remove rejuvenation. If rejuvenation is the only HOT on the person and it's like close to full duration, I don't want to use Swiftman on them. I want rejuvenation to stay on them. I don't mind removing regrowth HOT though. So that's something to keep in mind, and I'll talk about this in the next Prideful as well. We'll try and showcase it. And again, this is Prideful. This is a really easy pull if you have a lot of range DPS here, because a lot of times you can just outrange the AoE damage that they're dealing. You can see it right now. I'm not doing a good job here because I'm trying to keep the tank up and one of the warriors up. But here, this is a time where I kind of panic. So I have Convoke, and I was kind of trying to save it in order to do damage, in order to go Moonkin. But during this time here, I'm trying to heal up a lot of people. I'm trying to, again, I'm kind of in trouble here. A lot of people are taking damage. I'm going to use Convoke to heal the party here. And at the exact same time, there's a magic debuff. So this is something that you need to keep in mind if you're doing Halls of Atonement. During these mobs, you have to be very careful. You're gonna get a curse, possibly, and you're gonna get a magic debuff. If you dispel or decurse somebody, and then the magic debuff happens right afterwards, you'll have a cooldown on decurse or dispel. So you won't be able to dispel it. So in this group, what you really have to do, because there's a lot of people who can remove curses, you should never remove curses as a healer in this instant. You should wait for that magic debuff, because that magic debuff is really, really painful. On really high fortified Halls of Atonement, this is going to chunk for a good amount. So if you have a cooldown on your D-curse or D-spell, because you remove the curse, the person with the magic debuff might die. So in this case, of course, I'm in middle of the Convoke. I know that the person is not going to die in this case because I'm running Convoke. I'm going to let it finish. And then I'm gonna dispel the magic debuff. And then you can see here, 2 people got the curses, but we didn't really dispel them in time. But generally speaking, this is some like a little tip or trick, or something that to keep in mind of. You saw that the DPS died here, which is kind of what happened there is that the tank procced. So you can see the tank is in a pod and they're running backwards. So now we just have to kite this mob. So we kind of messed this up. But honestly, this mob, Shard is so easy to kite, and as long as you outrange it, you don't actually even need a tank for this. So even though we failed, even though the tank died, the DPS died, we can still fully recover from this. This mob is so easy to handle if you have a lot of range. If you have a lot of melee, this is gonna become a real problem. In terms of the playstyle that I'm using right now, you can see that it's just basically about hotting up. Make sure you have as many hots as possible on the people that need healing. You can see that the tank is a guardian druid. They don't tend to take that much damage, but you can see I'm running Spring Blossoms, which means that I'm going to be putting my Efflorescence down. Again, I'm trying to put my Efflorescence down when people are going to be there. I'm using my Innovate here as much as possible, because quite frankly, the more you use it, the less mana you're going to consume throughout the dungeon. Resto Druid is not really a stickler for mana. It's pretty decent in terms of the mana consumption. I've been playing a lot of like Discipline Priest, and that seems a lot more painful. I probably should reposition my Efflorescence here so it actually would hit the tank, so that's the issue for me, but I'm going into DPS. So this is something that I'm really bad with, and it's something that I really need to micromanage better. A lot of the times I'll be putting Moonfire and Sunfire on mobs, because I just quite frankly cannot figure out the... Am I gonna have 10 to 15 seconds to DPS here? I play very safe in a lot of these groups where I get... Starfire is such a long cast time. A lot of these bigger posts require Starfire cast, and Starfire is really long. So if I know that I have a couple of seconds to DPS, I will try and go to Boomkin Affinity and Starfire in order to provide more DPS, because he has a splash radius of I think 5 yards, which is less what Boomkins have. So that's something to consider. You need to make sure your Starfire is gonna splash to a lot of the DPS. So generally speaking, a lot of the times in these more, how do I say it, safer groups, Moonfire, Sunfire is literally the easiest way to go. Sometimes, if I know I'm not gonna be able to DPS for a long time, I might just cast Rat or Starfire, or generally just cast Rat in my normal form. I won't even go into Boomkin Infinity because I'm not 100% sure if I'll have enough time to do it. So that's something to consider as well. It really depends how organized the group is, and you can see here, and this is one of the mistakes that I did. Again, maybe we're going to talk through Prideful first before we're going to go into Heart of the Wild timing. So a lot of times Prideful healing, just putting out as many hearts as possible. I am running Scenario Ward here. You see these little orbs throughout the dungeon where I'm going and picking up. It's not Kyrian, it's literally my trinket. Every time you pick it up, you're going to refresh a buff on versatility. I think it's like 70 or something versatility. So again, I want to go back on this. So I'm putting rejuvenations on everybody. I'm collecting the buff there. You'll see here, I casted a regrowth buff. You can see that the tank has rejuvenation, life bloom, scenario ward, and regrowth hut. So what I'm going to do right now at this given instance, I'm going to Swiftman. And you'll see what happens. Again, I'm going to regrowth here, and then I'm going to Swiftman. So you can see what happened. I have the Soul of the Forest buff that you can't really see because of the play button. But it removed the regrowth hut. It didn't remove the rejuvenation, it didn't remove the life room, it didn't remove the scenario ward, it removed the regrowth hut. So now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go into Wild Growth, and I'm gonna go into Flourish. Or I could go into Flourish. At this given point, again, I waited a little bit longer, but you can go into Flourish. You can also extend your scenario ward as well by Flourish. You just need to make sure that scenario ward hot portion has been triggered. And this, honestly, this way of healing is gonna cover a lot of HPS, and after that I always basically save Tranquility. A lot of the times I barely ever use Tranquility outside of Prideful, because it just seems like there's just single target damage a lot of times, or spot healing that's needed, and I always have Tranquility available. And I don't know how much HPS I did there, it was around 10k HPS, And honestly, it was pretty easy with these cooldowns. I didn't have to use Convoke. You can see I still have Convoke and Heart of the Wild. And this is the problem that I run into. And this is the timing of the dungeon. And this is the timing of Heart of the Wild. And this is a pretty big issue. So if you're going into a dungeon as a Resto Druid, who's looking to DPS, and I feel like a lot of Resto Druids are going to be looking to DPS in terms of their Heart of the Wild, in terms of their Convoke the Spirit. You can see here I still have my Convoke the Spirit, I still have Heart of the Wild. I wasn't completely sure how the tanks are going to do the boss ball. I want to have Heart of the Wild for the boss, and I want to have Convoke for the boss. So I end up holding on for these for far too long. I think I got my Heart of the Wild. Obviously, I got it around this time. And then I used it in 13 minutes or something like that. So I hold it for like 8 minutes for the first boss. Which is not that bad of a deal if you feel like you need that Heart of the Wild DPS. I generally think that I could have just used it on cooldown as long as I could have combined it with Convoke. So definitely planning mistakes here in my opinion. I actually ended up holding on to Convoke for far too long as well because I wanted to do that combo. But you'll see we're going to kill a lot of trash pack mobs before we're going to go into the boss. You can see we're running a Boomkin there. They got the full moon as well, really good on them. I'm using Typhoon to push back and interrupt the AoE cast from Houndmaster here, which is not too bad. We have a Ventier Warrior, which also used the Ventier ability to get the Gargoyle there. So you can see here I'm also using my Soothe to soothe the bears. Very, very important. We do have 3 druids who can do it as well. So generally speaking, it's not going to be much of an issue in terms of soothing the bears. But as a Resto Druid, you need to make sure you're going to have Soothe available because it's one of the things that's really important. Both for Halls of Atonement on top of the Theater of Pain as well. Those things can actually wipe. So right now I'm just casting Starfire. I don't know if I'm going to use it into Convoke. I think I'm just going to, again, I'm casting Regrowth in Balance Druid Affinity. But generally speaking, I always tend to go out of it to reapply Life Bloom or reapply other heals. And I'm basically just, at the end of the day, maintaining Sunfire and Moonfire as the Resto Druid. And this is my problem. This is something that I really need to work out in terms of optimizing my DPS. I need to be a bit more, how do I say, trustworthy of the team that I'm playing with. And just basically be like, hey guys, I'm going to be casting my Starfire for the next 10-15 seconds or whatever. Just try not to die. You have to remember, I can still cast Regrowth in Boomkin Affinity, in Balance Affinity, so that's something important. If you're running the double Life Bloom Legendary, you can also apply double Life Bloom Legendaries or Life Blooms without getting out of Balance Affinity, which it's not a very popular legendary at all right now. Double Life Bloom Legendary is something that has fallen out of grace by a lot of Resto Druids. If you were to be looking at statistics for Resto Druid legendaries, probably the #1 legendary in high keys is going to be Circle Life of Death, because it gives you HPS and DPS, which is, again, not all legendaries to provide that. And the second most popular legendary is going to be Verdant Infusion, which is basically your hot extension legendary. And it's probably has picked up so much more popularity in the recent months or so because the amount of single target damage or single target healing that's required is pretty high. And again, tanks are taking a lot of damage. You can see here, I could have actually combined Tranquility with Flourish. I probably should think about that as well in the future. I'm never 100% certain if I'm going to use Tranquility for Prideful. So I'm like, again, if I'm using Tranquility, I should really think about extending it with Flourish. But like I mentioned, I usually can get by just using Flourish. So there's going to be an issue here. I think the tank is going to be dying pretty soon. Again, I used the spell here to dispel the curse. There could be a magic debuff happening at any point as well. So I'm kind of gambling here a little bit. Or actually, we haven't pulled the shard yet. So that's not too bad. So we're just dealing with the initial mobs. So it's not going to be too bad. But once we're going to pull the shard, there's going to be more AoE damage. And I think the tank dies. And I actually haven't looked through this yet. So I'm not 100% certain what exactly happened. I think I was out of range for a bit. You can see here I'm trying to rely on my HOTS. I'm not sure if I'm using Scenario Word. I'm not dispelling the Hunter. Okay, you see this? You see this? This is exactly where I could have ran into issues. So this is what I actually tell the group. There's going to be, the Hunter is going to get the curse. And I'm telling the group, I'm actually on Discord and this is what I'm telling the group. Hey guys, I'm not going to dispel this curse because there might be a magic debuff happening very, very, very soon. And what happens right afterwards is that, you see I didn't dispel it. I was actually thinking about this. And what happens right afterwards, magic debuff goes on to the same person. So with my next dispel, I'm actually removing magic and curse. So this was definitely the right call by me, but quite lucky in terms of the timing. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of your magic debuff. So the tank is not in the range here. He only has a life bloom. Okay, I refresh life bloom, doesn't have regrowth. I'm actually pretty, I think, okay, the tank gets really melted down there in 1 second. I'm not quite sure what hit it, but the tank ended up dying and we had to kite. So kiting Shard is really not that big of an issue because it's just going to be stationary for a long time. I didn't have Nature Swiftness, unfortunately, so I couldn't use it on the tank. So I guess, again, I'm using Nature Swiftness quite a lot. It's your main spot healing ability to have. And honestly, I can't see myself playing Resto Druid without Nature Swiftness. If there's an ability that I grew to love so quickly, has to be Nature Swiftness at this given point. I could have used Convoke. Again, I'm still holding on to Convoke. Way too much holding on to Convoke. I should have been using it a lot more often. Again, guys, there's a lot of... I feel like Resto Druid right now, there's a lot of finesse in terms of how you can optimize your DPS rotation. I think that's probably the hardest part of Resto Druid right now. Trying to balance your DPS and healing. When I play my Resto Shaman in terms of the DPS rotation for Resto Shaman, a lot of the times it's just putting Flame Shock and, you know, Lava Bursts, Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolts or whatever. And Resto Druid has a lot more ways of optimizing it, and honestly, you're gonna do as good of a DPS as much, depending on how much time you want to put into it. So in here, I think we have 5 or 6 members here. I could have avoided, or I might not even put Moonfire on these members. I could just go Starfire, 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 and hopefully, maybe possibly proc my Lunar Eclipse as well. Again, I'm trying to go Starfire, but you can see a person is almost dying, and I just end up casting Regrowth, and then I end up refreshing dots. And this is an issue that I have. I should really trust my group a bit more, and I should have just went full on Starfire, 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 and ignored Solar Eclipse and things like that. So a lot of the times I'm just relying on the damage from my dots, and that's around, I think, 1 to 1.5k at the end of the dungeon, depending. But I should be breaking 2k if I'm being honest with you. If I were to optimize Resto Druid's DPS, I should be aiming for a lot more damage than that. It really depends on what kind of key you're running and what kind of group you're doing with. So generally, we're gonna go into the boss, and this is going to be, again, I hold on to my Convoke and I hold on to my Heart of the Wild for literally like an insane amount, which was just very silly of me, because I wasn't sure of when we're going to face this boss. This is why MDT, method dungeon tools and things like that are really cool to know. Like, hey guys, how long do you think it's gonna take here? And again, part of playing Resto Druid is optimizing your Heart of the Wild, but I'm basically doing it right now. So I pop Heart of the Wild right here, and I'm trying to, again, okay, I went too far ahead. I'm trying to pop I used 2 Starfires because I could only use 2 Starfires to go into Solar Eclipse. So right now I'm Solar Eclipse, but I'm again panicking here because the tank is taking a lot of damage. I end up refreshing my Life Bloom and going out of Balance Affinity. I go into Boomkin Affinity again, and then I proc my Convoke. Now, as you can see, I actually got the full moon on it. But my Convoke macro is missing a lot of things. So my Convoke macro does not have me using a potion. I should actually make a macro where I use the Intellect Potion, or there's also a DPS Potion that I forget the name of. They can be very useful as well. I should also try and get PvP trinkets or better unused trinkets to work with my Convoke as well. So all of a sudden I could have a Convoke macro like this long, where it procs 4 different things within a single global cooldown. It procs the Intellect Potion, it procs trinkets, it procs my racials, it procs Convoke and Heart of the Wild. And I'm missing some of those parts, so my Convoke is really not that strong. The double trinkets that I was using, I think I had Unbound Changeling that I got very recently, and I also had this, like I mentioned, the Versatility Group Trinket where I shoot out orbs and the group has to take it out. So this is actually pretty rough right now with what's happening with Storming. You can see the Storming nearly hit me there. If I get hit by Storming, I'm dead. You can see the little orbs here on the ground. This is something that is going to give you around 70 versatility if the group picks it up. And again, I have to stand on some bad stuff there for a little bit. But generally speaking, the tank does not really need a lot of healing. I can go full on DPS here. I could have gone a lot more DPS here if I really played it a bit better. But generally speaking, I'm pretty happy with the boss here. I used most of my cooldowns, and I think we're going to invis straight away from here. And again, being a druid is very nice in terms of, again, invising. We got a lot of mobs. You can see we actually got 80% of the mobs right now. So this is one of the popular strats of doing it. We're going to get one of these gargoyles or slashers in order to proc Prideful into the next boss. and we're gonna use hero for the next boss. You can see that we didn't use hero for this, so this was fine. The warrior had to die because it didn't have invisibility potion. Too bad. Too bad the warrior didn't have it, so we're going to battle res him straight away and just kill this mob. Again, the name of the game, at least I feel for Resto Druid right now in terms of legendaries, I'm really liking Circle Life of Death. I'm probably gonna craft Verdant Fusion second. I do feel that playing with a Guardian Druid, the DPS or healing requirement dips a lot lower because Guardian Druids are quite tanky, probably the tankiest tanks in the game right now. If you're playing with Vengeance DH, Vengeance is gonna have to kite a lot. They're probably gonna proc multiple times, but Vengeance can die multiple times. They have talents, they have trinkets, they can really, you know, dying is not the end of the world because you're just not gonna die. But the healing requirement for Vengeance is going to be very high. Healing requirement for Brewmasters is going to be really high, but it's predictable type of healing. So maybe Verdant Diffusion is going to be interesting. I still feel the Circle Life of Death in terms of damage and healing is probably my favorite legendary right now. And I'm really enjoying the numbers that I'm receiving for it. I'm really enjoying my Resto Druid in terms of the healing that I'm doing during Prideful, because I think I'm having more fun in Prideful on my Druid than my Shaman right now. Maybe it's just because how the HOTS scale up and how they seem to work really nicely with Flourish. I'm not sure if I'm gonna use Tranquility here, but I definitely should. Again, I'm gonna proc Swiftmend. I proc Swiftmend here. I get Soul of the Forest. I use Wild Growth, and I think I'm gonna go with Flourish. I think I'm gonna go with Trank. You see, I probably should have went in this case situation. I really miscalculated this. I probably should have went with Tranquility and then Flourish, or possibly even saved Flourish because I don't need it. Because you can see we killed this boss really quickly. Again, you have a lot of different options. So I have my Convoke, and I think I'm actually going to use Convoke for healing, because I was a little bit scared about how the AoE phases. So what you need to do right now for this boss, let's go back a little bit. You need to bait. You need to stay away because you don't want to get the red stuff on the ground. This is probably what a lot of people are gonna approach this boss with. If you're ranged, stay at the ends. Now, when the ads come in, everyone goes to the very start of the boss because you want to make sure the ads are gonna be close together. I'm trying to heal as much. I think I'm gonna use no, I'm not gonna use Convoke here. Again, I didn't actually dispel the right person. I dispelled myself instead. The weak aura I have tells me who has it. It has this like little border around it in terms of which player is going to be selected. So that's really interesting in my opinion. Again, I should be baiting this a bit more. I think actually, there you go. I'm going to try and bait this a bit further. The next stun doesn't matter at all because all the ads are dead already. So this has no... It literally doesn't matter at all. I think just dispelling a DPS is going to be better because the fact that they might deal damage, or dispelling the person that has it because they can run out and they can avoid the dot. The dot is really punishing. Really punishing in high tyrannical keys, and it's something that you have to do. And I'm going to do a pretty bad fail here. I don't play my Resto Druid as much as I want to, and I definitely don't use my Soul Shape as much as I want to, and I kind of got trigger happy. You can see here, I'm actually using Convoke because the damage is really rough, but I shouldn't have used Convoke because I could have used Flourish. My Flourish just came off cooldown. So I could have just used Flourish for this instead of Convoke, but I kind of wanted this oh crap moment button. So there was a decent amount of damage happening here, and I'm going to be selected, and the ads are all here. You can see them all here, which is fine. The boss is basically dead, and I pop it a little too early, a second too early, in terms of Soul Shape. So that was, it was for scientific purposes. Yes, popping it a second earlier will kind of fail it. So yeah, it was something that I tried to figure out. We're talking about Discord on how to do it, and yeah, so it doesn't work, guys. Yeah, so that was probably the hardest boss here, because it can be extremely messed up if you don't kill the stone statues or stone ads, if you don't get them with the circle. So generally speaking, after this, it's kind of easy, or generally speaking, in terms of boss, is going to be relatively easy. These trash bags are going to be extremely hard for tank, because these mobs, you can see here, I did remove my suit, or I suited the bears. The bears are going to be really annoying. So you do have things like Ursol's Vortex, you have Typhoon and things like that to try and help your tank to kite. The tank is gonna get wrecked in this. Like, there's no debate about this. Trying to maintain all the HOTS on the tank. Again, I'm trying to get the Spring Blossoms on them. They have 5 stacks right now. They're going into the room. I can't really follow them in because of this. I'm trying to get in there. I think they procced I think they actually procced it this time. I'm kind of panicking. I got hit by storming again. The tank is still alive, but the warrior took aggro. Then the boomkin took aggro when they came back up. So basically, again, this is really rough. In terms of how you're going to kite these bears, honestly, I think the way to go about this is the tank goes in, gets as much aggro as possible, and then you just kite for days. And again, this might not be a fun playstyle, but it's honestly something that probably has to be done because it's going to be really, really awkward. But again, this is not going to be end of the run type of deal. It doesn't matter. We didn't lose a whole lot of time. This is a relatively difficult pull if you do it quite large. We're doing the second pull. There's going to be another inspiring mob here. Again, you have to remember, with inspiring, you can only CC the actual inspiring mob. You can't CC the mobs around it. So there's going to be a decent amount of damage. But I'm kind of sick of this, and I'm going to say, like, hey, I'm going to pop hard. Again, I have to dispel the magic. I'm going to pop Heart of the Wild. I'm going to go into my... We're going to go into Lunar Eclipse here by casting Rats. And then we're going to go Convoke just to DPS. And probably I should have followed this kind of mindset throughout the whole dungeon. Just popping on cooldown. Or at least popping it during times or phases where I know I'm going to have a decent amount of time to DPS. This might not have been the best way to do it, but honestly, I just was holding on to it for such a long time. I think it probably would have been better if I would have procced my Heart of the Wild earlier throughout the dungeon, and then I would have used my Heart of the Wild for this boss, because Heart of the Wild for this boss is relatively easy in terms of what's happening. It's really, really easy. So what we tried to do here, the warrior didn't really do it. It didn't really happen, but you can get double gargoyles for this pack. I'm not 100% certain how you can do this event here, and if you know it, guys, leave a comment below on how to optimally do it, how to get the double gargoyles as a Venti, because I don't actually have a Venti healer right now besides Discipline Priest, and I haven't really done this dungeon. But you can get double gargoyles at this point, and they're going to be scaling with like haste and things like that, and it's going to be very, very, very strong for DPS. Again, the first gargoyle goes away, and then we mind control the second one. And then, but it only had the very little HP. So this boss doesn't require a whole lot. You can actually DPS quite a bit, but it really depends on how safe you want to do it. You can see me. I'm just trying to maintain my dots. I go into my Boomkin form once in a while. I use my Star Surges. I use my Rats to go into Lunar Eclipse. And then, again, I have to do a bit of movement with this. I should have been using my Starfires there. I have to run away. The only AoE damage that's going to happen is going to be during those ads phases. And honestly, just having a couple hots, even at this level, 19, Fortified, is not going to be a lot of things. As long as your DPS and your tank has an interrupt rotation, that's probably going to be a bigger thing. You saw the hunter there picking up one of the orbs. I'm still running away. There's a lot of movement here. Again, I should be trying to optimize my DPS a bit more. I'm going to be casting Starfire. I'm going to go into... Again, I didn't get to do it because I panicked, because I saw the tank was taking a lot of damage. And then you can see the kiting is kind of going all over the place here a bit, but the damage is not that big, and I'm using my Convoke to DPS. Again, this Convoke was really late, and it wasn't timed with Heart of the Wild, but what can you do? You're not always going to get Convokes to time with Heart of the Wild. So now we're going to go to the very end section of the whole dungeon, and honestly, this is not going to be too hard in terms of how to optimize here. You just need to basically AoE everything down. You need to kind of have ad control. In terms of my stats, I'm definitely... You can see my stats here. I have around 16% haste. I definitely would want to have more haste on my Resto Druid. I feel like Resto Druid feels a lot more fun with more haste. Again, at the end of the day, intellect is going to be the king, and a lot of people you ask what is the best stats for Resto Druid, they'll probably say haste mastery, but honestly, it's always going to... Like, again, intellect is the king, but I really, really, really do enjoy a high haste on a Resto Druid. It makes it feel a lot more fun, because a lot of your abilities are on global cooldown, a lot of abilities are like instant cast, and just being able to cast them a bit more often feels really nice. Circle Life or Dead in terms of the legendary feels really nice. Like I mentioned throughout the video, I might be crafting Verdant Infusion in the future. Not 100% certain on that, because I do like Memory of Mother Tree. If you're doing raiding, I think Memory of Mother Tree is also a good option. Again, you have to remember there is the Rejuve Spreader legendary, but that's only good. The Rejuvenation legendary, that's only good in raids. That's not really an option for Mythic Plus at this given point. In terms of, again, Covenant's Night Phase seems to be the way to go. I feel it's extremely, extremely versatile. I am running, like I mentioned, Scenario Ward. some people do make use of abundance in Mythic Plus and in raids, and I feel that could be an option, especially where you're going to be using a lot more or spreading your regrowths. So for things like bursting, grievous, it might be a really solid option. I like Scenario Ward in terms of applying extra mastery stacks to the tank, because I do feel tanks get absolutely annihilated in this tier. Balance Affinity, again, I've talked about Balance Affinity and the rotation for it, the Starfires, so rats and things like that, and the burst of Balance Affinity feels really great. And I'm gonna talk about my personal opinions here. I do feel that going into Balance Affinity, going into Heart of the Wild, going into your Eclipse and then Convoke is really, really interesting and really, I tried to drink here for a bit because my mana is quite low. I think Balance Affinity is really fun in terms of burst, but honestly, I'm not a huge fan of Balance Affinity. I am much bigger fan of Feral Affinity throughout Legion. I think Balance Affinity and things like Starfire, the cost time associated with Starfire feels sluggish, does not feel great, and I kind of wish Feral Affinity would be back in the meta, if I'm being completely honest. It's one of the things that I'm not a huge fan of right now. Again, I've been using a lot of Tranquilities without extending them with Flourish. I should be fixing that. Probably shouldn't even use Tranquility in this instance at all. I wasn't sure if anyone's gonna pop the cooldown. I think the Balance Druid popped Convoke or one of the cooldowns, and it just got absolutely annihilated. So I really shouldn't have used one of the cooldowns, either Flourish or Trank, for this boss fight. But for this boss fight, we actually end up kind of cheesing it, because I think with a warrior you can use like Spell Reflect to cheese the beams. I'm not 100% certain. Again, if you're playing a warrior, let me know how you can cheese this boss, because I don't tend to play with a DPS warrior that often. So there's actually only two people that need soaking. I think it was the tank and the warrior, and they took very little damage. And I was a little bit scared at the start of it. I was like, am I gonna need Convoke? Because you can see here, I did pop Heart of the Wild, but I'm not using Convoke because I'm thinking, like, am I gonna need Convoke for healing here? I use my Nature Swiftness on the Hunter that got hit here as well. You can see here, only tank and warrior taking damage, and I'm using Iron Bark on the tank with Scenario Ward on the tank. On the warrior, and I'm just basically spamming regrowths. And I was just really genuinely like, I was not expecting this little amount of damage happening. But I'm still very apprehensive, and I'm thinking like, am I gonna need a second? I'm gonna have to use Convoke for the second part of it, so I'm still holding on to it. If I would have known it would have been this much damage, I probably would have used Convoke with Heart of the Wild from the get-go, and it would have been a far better option to do it. Again, you can use Convoke to DPS during Prideful as well. That's also something that I didn't mention, but if you feel very comfortable, using Convoke to DPS during Prideful is very solid. So I'm actually using Convoke here because we missed a stack and I got really scared, and I think that was okay, because you can see the Hunter's taking a lot of damage, and I'm using Flourish as well to help out the Hunter, because the Hunter did dip quite a low. So I think it was worth playing this safe by avoiding a death. I'm not sure, maybe, you know, hindsight 2020, but like I should have mentioned, during Prideful, there's a lot of mistakes that I made during this run. There's a lot of things that I could optimize. There's a lot of ways I could optimize the DPS. I could have used Convoke for Prideful. That's very good option of doing it, because again, Convoke, you kill them up quicker, less healing. But you could also make a suggestion as well. You should also think about the fact that if you're using Convoke after Prideful is also a good thing, because you're gonna have Prideful buff. So you have to make a decision: do I want to use Convoke the Spirits during Prideful because of healing, maybe because of damage, or do I want to use it after Prideful because I'm gonna get additional damage from Prideful? So that's something also to consider. Again, most of the times for Prideful, I feel Flourish and Trank are going to be more than good enough to get through like 19-20 keys at this given point. At least it feels like it for me. So I don't think you need to use Convoke. Convoke you can use throughout the dungeon in terms of damage, in terms of assigning it with Heart of the Wild. Like you saw throughout the dungeon, I really messed up the usage of Heart of the Wild and Convokes, and it's something that I can get used to a lot more. In terms of, let's go have a little look in terms of talents and some of the legendaries that are being used by a lot of Resto Druids just before the video is going to end. So this is something that I talked throughout the video in terms of the talents and legendaries. And again, like I mentioned, a lot of people are using Scenario Ward, a lot of people are using Flourish because they want that additional cooldown during Prideful, because they're using Convoke for DPS. Spring Blossom, Soul of the Forest, Heart of the Wild, Balance Druid, Affinity, or Balance Affinity seems to be the way to go for nearly all the high keys right now. And you can see there is a sprinkling of abundance in terms of depending on the week and what you need. In terms of legendaries, you can see Circle Life of Death is the not mandatory, but it's probably the most popular one right now with, again, 331. Verdant Diffusion is also very, very popular here. So again, it's climbing a lot. Memory of Mother Tree here, and honestly, Dark Tided Lessons has fallen a lot. It's fallen a lot since then. So in terms of the covenants, I've talked about Night Fae is just the way to go. What I'm using in terms of soulbinds, I'm using Naya. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Nia. This is quite strong right now because it gives you have to think about this. I don't know if I can showcase it here. I can Growth Invigoration. So this is something that gives you Growth Invigoration, which is going to give you Mastery, and it gives you double potency conduits depending on which renown level you are right now. Dreamweaver is also going to give you double potency conduits, but you're basically getting Paw Tender instead of Growth Invigoration. So Paw Tender is something, oh crap, am I going to die every 10 minutes type of deal? Or do I want constant throughput through Growth Invigoration? And I feel like Growth Invigoration is a pretty good way to go about if you feel like you're not going to die. I personally running Growth Invigoration, Naya, double potency conduits, and double potency conduits always going to be conflicts of elements, which is going to make your Convoke stronger and also unstoppable growth. This is something that I've been using a lot for Mythic Plus. Again, if you feel like you're going to die, Paw Tender can also be a very decent option. So this is something that's going to work for this week. I think we're at like Renown 29 or something along those lines. 28 or something like that. So generally speaking, this is my video of Resto Druids and walkthrough. There's a lot of mistakes that I made. Again, hindsight 2020 type of deal. Let me know if or what ways I could improve. Let me know if this helped you out in terms of Resto Druid. My personal opinion is that Resto Druid is a really fun healer. But I kind of miss that Feral Affinity, if I'm being completely honest.